Rome didn't fall because of barbarian swords or foreign invasions. It began crumbling long before that from the inside. In the halls of power, ambitious men plotted in the shadows. Senators sold loyalties, emperors were puppets, and generals turned traitor. The real threat to Rome wasn't outside its walls, it was sitting in the Senate. This is not just the story of an empire's fall. This is the tragic story of power, shame. Imagine yourself standing in the heart of ancient Rome, the Forum Romanum, where the city's pulse beats strongest. The grandeur is overwhelming, marble pillars soaring toward the sky, majestic statues of emperors glinting under the golden sunlight, and crowds of citizens bustling through busy marketplaces. Senators in crisp white togas debate laws, their voices echoing off the stone walls. Legionnaires in shining armor march in perfect rhythm, a symbol of Rome's might and discipline. This is Rome, at its peak, a colossal empire ruling over millions, seemingly eternal, indestructible. But beneath this glittering surface, something darker stirred. A quiet erosion that would one day collapse the empire, not by invading forces, but from the rot spreading within. The beginning of the end wasn't marked by foreign conquest or a single devastating battle. It began with politics relentless, volatile, and deeply corrosive. The very guardians of Rome's glory began turning against one another, driven by ambition and fear. When the Republic fell and Augustus rose to power, stability returned for a time. Augustus was a master strategist, balancing the Senate, the military, and public sentiment. His reign ushered in the Pax Romana, a long period of peace and prosperity. But with his death, balance faltered. Power, now concentrated in the hands of the emperor, became a coveted prize and a dangerous one. Rulers were expected to be near divine figures of ultimate authority, command, and justice. That elevated status, however, turned the imperial throne into a perilous seat. Plots became more frequent. Silent rivalries brewed within palaces. Even those charged with protecting emperors, such as the Praetorian Guard, sometimes influenced successions through force or political manipulation. Historical figures like Caligula, Claudius, and Nero met their ends in tragic and suspicious circumstances, often betrayed by those closest to them. Each power shift deepened instability, shaking the foundations of Roman leadership. The Senate, once the noble engine of Roman governance, was reduced to a ceremonial echo of its former self. Many senators focused more on personal preservation and enrichment than on the welfare of the state. Loyalties shifted rapidly. Corruption seeped into every corner of the empire. Provincial governors exploited their regions. Officials demanded excessive taxes. Bribery and favoritism became widespread. Even as Rome expanded, conquering new lands, acquiring wealth, and projecting dominance, it also became increasingly difficult to manage. Each new territory required administration, defense, and integration into the complex Roman system. Rome's economic success had long relied on expansion, which provided new labor, tribute, and markets. But as expansion slowed, so did the flow of these resources. The consequences were severe. With fewer conquests, the empire began consuming itself. Taxes increased dramatically, weighing heavily on the common citizen. Trade routes that once spanned from Britannia to India became vulnerable to unrest and instability. Inflation surged as currency was devalued, coins diluted with cheaper metals to stretch imperial funds. Rural populations declined. Farmers, overwhelmed by taxes and unable to protect their lands, turned to wealthy landowners for security. In return for protection, many gave up personal freedoms, a social shift that foreshadowed the feudal structures of medieval Europe. Meanwhile, the political system unraveled. Beginning in 235 AD, Rome entered a period known as the crisis of the 3rd century, an age of almost constant upheaval. In just 50 years, over 20 emperors rose to power, many through force or under duress, few with long or stable reigns. Regional commanders declared themselves rulers, military factions clashed, civil conflict erupted across the empire. Roman forces fought among themselves, weakening the unity that had once been Rome's greatest strength. As the empire turned inward, its borders grew vulnerable. The legions, distracted by internal rivalries, struggled to hold the frontiers. Groups from beyond the Rhine and Danube tested Roman defenses. Some regions experienced raids, instability, and social breakdown. This wasn't just decline. This was Rome unraveling from glory to fragmentation, from power to shame. In 285 AD, Emperor Diocletian made a bold decision to divide the empire into two, East and West. He believed that splitting power between co-rulers would make governance more manageable across such a vast territory. But instead of unity, the divide slowly deepened. Two empires emerged not just in geography, but in identity. The Eastern Empire, with its wealthier cities, stable economy, and defensible borders, managed to endure the storms of the coming centuries. The Western Empire, however, struggled. It was plagued by a weakened economy, constant military pressure, and escalating political dysfunction. In the West, political instability reached alarming levels. Real authority rested not with emperors, but with powerful military leaders. The Senate had become largely ceremonial. Decision-making was shaped more by self-preservation than by civic duty. One of the most telling moments came in 193 AD. After the downfall of Emperor Commodus, the Praetorian Guard, originally formed to protect Rome's rulers, took the unprecedented step of offering the imperial throne to the highest bidder. Didius Julianus secured the position not through merit or loyalty, but through promises of extravagant rewards to the Guard. The empire, in effect, had been treated like a commodity offered for sale to the most generous patron. It was a moment of national disgrace, a transaction that shattered the illusion of noble leadership and outraged the public. This act symbolized the deeper crisis gripping Rome, a leadership driven by greed, a system hollowed from within, and a people losing faith in the very institutions meant to guide them. It was not the final blow, but it was a turning point. A moment where the empire's moral foundation cracked, where betrayal replaced duty, and short-term gain was valued above long-term survival. This wasn't just political decline, it was the beginning of the end. The soul of Rome had been compromised. What was once the center of law, order, and authority became a volatile arena where ambition often triumphed over principle, and survival demanded cunning over honor. Emperors no longer reigned with stability or trust. Many rose and fell in rapid succession, often elevated or removed by powerful generals or political factions. Rome's throne had become a prize and a perilous one. The Praetorian Guard, once protectors of the emperor, transformed into political power brokers. They shifted loyalty based on promises of payment or influence. For many emperors, the greatest threat wasn't at the gates of Rome, it stood just outside their own chambers. This era, known as the crisis of the 3rd century, was marked not only by internal disorder, but also by escalating external pressure. Across Rome's vast frontiers, various groups tested the strength of an empire in turmoil. Germanic peoples such as the Goths, Vandals, and Franks pressed on the borders, sensing opportunity in Rome's vulnerability. To the east, the Parthians and later the Sasanian Persians challenged Rome's control over its wealthiest provinces. And yet, even the word barbarian, so often used in Roman records, reflected Rome's own bias. It was a term applied broadly to those outside their cultural sphere. In truth, these were diverse societies with their own political systems, alliances, and histories, many of which had long-standing ties with Rome, both as adversaries and allies. For centuries, Rome had enlisted soldiers from these regions as auxiliaries, granting them land and status. Some leaders were even granted Roman titles, but as the empire weakened, these alliances fractured. Trust eroded as promises were broken and arrogance replaced diplomacy. Many groups sought protection inside Roman territory, fleeing far greater dangers, including the advance of the Huns, a nomadic confederation from the Eurasian steppes, whose arrival reshaped the entire geopolitical landscape. Led by Attila, the Huns moved with speed and force, displacing countless peoples in their path. What followed wasn't a series of raids. It was a mass migration of communities. families, elders, children, all seeking refuge. Rome, already struggling with internal division and economic strain, was unprepared. The arrival of these displaced peoples led to resource shortages, administrative breakdowns, and rising tensions. Diplomatic efforts faltered. Agreements collapsed. In 378 AD, one such group, the Visigoths, rebelled after being mistreated while seeking protection within the empire. At the Battle of Adrianople, they confronted the Roman army and achieved a stunning victory. Emperor Valens was lost in the battle, along with much of his force. This moment shattered the long-standing image of Roman military dominance. It was a symbolic and strategic blow. The decades that followed were filled with efforts to reform and recover, but unity never truly returned. The Western Empire, in particular, became increasingly fragmented. Leadership changed hands often. Resources diminished. Confidence in institutions waned. Then, in 410 AD, something once thought unthinkable occurred. Rome, the Eternal City, was entered and looted by the Visigoths, led by Alaric, a former Roman military commander. Alaric had once served Rome loyally, but after repeated dismissals and unmet promises from imperial officials, frustration turned to action. He marched toward Rome not as a wild invader, but as a man who had been denied recognition and respect. The city's defenses crumbled with minimal resistance. For 3 days, Rome was subject to looting. While not defined by widespread destruction, the event delivered a psychological shock. The symbolic heart of the Roman world had been breached. The world watched in disbelief. The city that had once ruled the known world, a beacon of civilization and imperial majesty, had been humbled. For many, this was not just a historical event. It was the end of an age. The collapse didn't come all at once, but this moment marked a turning point. The myth of Rome's invincibility was gone. The illusion of invincibility. The illusion of unity. The illusion that Rome's power still came from strength, not from memory. Years of corruption and betrayal had hollowed out the empire. Foreign migrations tested Rome's defenses and exposed its deep internal weaknesses. But the crisis didn't end there. It only grew worse. In 455 AD, a second and even more devastating blow came this time from across the sea. The Vandals, a powerful group based in North Africa, launched a maritime assault on Rome. Under King Genseric, their fleet crossed the Mediterranean with precision and purpose. Where the Visigoths had struck in frustration, the Vandals came with calculation. They targeted treasures, not just in gold and silver, but sacred objects, even ancient relics captured during Rome's earlier conquests of Jerusalem. The timing was disastrous for Rome. The emperor had been killed just days before. No army stood to defend the city. No plan existed to protect the population. The capital was paralyzed. For 2 weeks, the Vandals occupied Rome. There was no widespread loss of life, but the symbolic, political, and economic damage was enormous. Rome's legacy, already fragile, was dealt another crushing blow. From this moment on, the word Vandal would forever be associated with destruction, a reflection of just how deeply this event scarred Roman memory. As the Western Empire continued to fragment, so did Rome's central role in leadership. The imperial capital was moved to Ravenna, a safer, more defensible city, but also far removed from the traditional heart of Roman civilization. Meanwhile, in the vacuum of true authority, military commanders and local rulers began acting independently. They dismissed imperial commands. They fought each other for territory. Rome's central government became little more than a symbol without power, without unity. In 475 AD, a child was placed on the throne, Romulus Augustulus. He wasn't a ruler. He was a placeholder, a last echo of an empire in collapse. 2 years later, in 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire came to a quiet but definitive end. Odoacer, a Germanic military leader, deposed the boy emperor and declared himself king of Italy. No Roman armies rose to defend the empire. No senate fought to preserve it. The system Rome had built based on law, order, administration, and imperial rule didn't fall in one dramatic moment. It eroded, slowly, from within, compromised by unchecked ambition, political infighting, broken alliances, and widespread disillusionment. This was the real story behind the fall. Not just battles and invasions, but decades of self-inflicted wounds. The Roman Empire wasn't destroyed by an outside force. It was dismantled by the very people who were meant to protect it. The deposition of Romulus Augustulus in 476 AD by Odoacer traditionally signifies the end of the Western Roman Empire. However, this event should not be interpreted as the sudden collapse of a once mighty empire, but rather as the culmination of a prolonged period of decline marked by internal decay and systemic failures. For nearly 5 centuries, Rome exerted unparalleled influence over the Mediterranean region, shaping legal frameworks, cultural norms, governance structures, and collective identity. The empire's disintegration was a gradual process, driven primarily by internal political weaknesses compounded by external pressures. The internal political machinations that undermined Rome's stability eroded the foundational pillars of governance more severely than any external military threat. Systemic corruption weakened state institutions, while ambitious military leaders and political figures subverted public interests for personal gain. The military, once a symbol of Rome's strength, became fragmented due to factional rivalries and power struggles. Administrative complexity, characterized by overlapping jurisdictions and competing authorities, impeded effective decision-making and governance. This fragmentation critically undermined the empire's ability to respond to crises or implement cohesive policies. The role of the emperor, traditionally a unifying figure and guarantor of justice, was reduced to that of a contested prize, subject to violent usurpation or bribery. This instability hindered the establishment of durable governance structures capable of managing the vast and diverse territories of the empire. While the Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, successfully maintained political cohesion and administrative efficacy for several more centuries, the Western Roman Empire fragmented into a series of successor kingdoms. These new polities, often led by former barbarian chieftains, integrated Roman institutional legacies with their indigenous cultures, thereby influencing the socio-political landscape of medieval Europe. Despite the Western Empire's collapse, Rome's enduring legacy shaped subsequent civilizations. Roman law provided the foundation for many contemporary legal systems. Latin evolved into the Romance languages spoken by millions today, and Roman architectural and engineering innovations informed later infrastructural developments. Additionally, Christianity, once persecuted, became the dominant religion, significantly influencing Western cultural and intellectual traditions. However, the fall of the Western Roman Empire ushered in a period historically termed the Dark Ages, characterized by economic decline, decentralization of political authority, and diminished cultural production within Western Europe. The political failures that precipitated Rome's decline serve as a cautionary example of the consequences of unchecked power, political fragmentation, and neglect of the public welfare. The collapse also underscores the profound human impact of political instability, displacement, loss of livelihoods, and the disruption of social order. Ultimately, Rome's fall was not merely a political event, but a significant human tragedy. Yet, from this period of transformation, new societal structures, such as feudalism, emerged, leading to the eventual reorganization and revitalization of Europe. The experience of the Roman Empire demonstrates that the resilience of a state depends not solely on military might or economic resources, but on justice, political unity, and the trust of its citizenry. The internal betrayals and ambitions that contributed to Rome's demise highlight the inherent vulnerabilities within any civilization lacking these essential elements. If you found this story of Rome's rise and fall fascinating, hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's greatest mysteries. Share your thoughts below. What do you think was the single biggest factor in Rome's collapse?